Chapter 3. Great Teachers, Real Teachers. Acta non verba. Deeds, not words. Motto of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Kings Point, New York. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy has a battle standard, a military flag. Kings Point is the only Federal Service Academy awarded a battle standard. The battle standard is carried with the colors, the American flag, always. Kings Point's battle standard perpetuates a memory of the 142 Academy cadets/midshipmen who were casualties of World War II. The 142 died on U.S. merchant marine ships, carrying war supplies to Europe. They perished when German submarines, hunting in wolf packs, torpedoed their ships. Kings Point is privileged as the only academy among the nation's 5 federal academies authorized to carry a battle standard as part of its color guard. Kings Point cadets/midshipmen have served in the Korean, Vietnam, and Middle East wars. I was one of approximately 30 students who served in Vietnam. And, thankfully, no student has perished since World War II. Hell Week. I left Hawaii in August of 1965 for Kings Point via New York City. My aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan and hired a limo to take us to the academy. After the pleasantries and the pomp and circumstance of officers in dress white uniforms greeting parents, relatives, and new students, the parents left with smiles on their faces, proud that their sons, in my case nephew, had been accepted to such a prestigious school. The grounds of Kings Point are breathtaking. The property on which the school is situated used to be the Walter Chrysler Estate on Long Island Sound, with New York City in the distance. Just before the parents left, the publicity officer asked if I would take a photo with another new cadet/midshipman. The other student was from Long Island, and his home was less than 5 miles from the academy. The publicity officer wanted a picture of the student from closest to the academy and me, the student from the farthest away. As we walked out the main gate for the photo op, I said, "This is pretty nice." The other student shook his head and said, "Odds you won't be here next week." He added, "Hell Week is about to begin. 20% of us will be gone in a month. 65% of our class will not graduate." Like an idiot, I asked, "What happens to those who wash out?" My new friend smirked and said, "You didn't read the contract, did you?" "No," I replied feebly. "They have the right to send us straight to Vietnam," my fellow student said, as we smiled for the camera. As soon as all parents and family had departed and the punch and cookies were put away, the yelling and screaming started. First assignment: memorize the mission of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. We would be tested after dinner that night, if we had dinner. Welcome to Hell Week. We were now officially plebe S, 4th class midshipmen. A 3rd classman, probably 19 years old, takes over and starts barking orders. About 20 of us are lined up as the 3rd classman barks. Section: attend hut, dress, right face, pick up your bags, forward march. Hell Week had begun. That was Monday. A week later, on a Sunday night after dinner, our first free time, I stood on a hill and looked west over the lights of New York City toward Hawaii and cried. I had survived Hell Week. Only 4 more years to go. I wonder if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The washout rate was as advertised. Of the approximately 400 students who started in my class, only about 165 graduated in 1969. The class of 1969 included a number of students who had washed out from the class of 1968, aspiring to be anchorman. While many of my classmates wanted to be class officers and graduate with the highest GPA, all I wanted to be was the anchorman spot, the graduating midshipman with the lowest GPA. Why? The anchorman made a lot of money because every student threw money into a pot to skew the curve for everyone. Unfortunately, my GPA was 0.03 points above the anchorman's GPA. I believe the only reason I graduated from Kings Point was because I was interested in the subjects I was taught. I wanted to become a ship's officer and spent a year at sea traveling the world, and I had some really great teachers. Most were real teachers who practiced what they taught. For example, I learned spherical trigonometry and celestial navigation from a real ship's navigator and spherical trigonometry teacher. The basis of celestial navigation, which is navigation by the sun, moon, and stars at sea, is spherical trigonometry. One of my favorite teachers of all times was a U.S. Military Academy graduate, a West Pointer who flew B-17 bombers over Germany, was shot down twice, and escaped capture twice. After leaving the Army, he went to graduate school and earned a doctorate in English with a minor in economics. That teacher introduced our class to the teachings of Marx, Stalin, Hitler, Lenin, and Mao. It was during his classes that I realized that economic philosophies were much like religions. Just as a religious philosophy has a leader, so do economic philosophies. Our teacher emphasized the point that disciples and followers will kill for both economic and religious philosophies. He used the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and an example of Protestants killing Catholics, both Christian religions, in Northern Ireland. The Tet Offensive. On January 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive began. Tet, as it was referred to, was one of the largest escalations and military campaigns of the Vietnam War. The VC and the North Vietnamese People's Army attacked cities and military bases all around South Vietnam. As part of my sea year from the Academy, in 1966, my cargo ship had delivered bombs into Vietnam and Thailand. Having been in the war zone, the war became of special interest to me. Every night on the CBS Evening News, I would watch and listen closely to Walter Cronkite's narration of the war's progress. In 1968, as the Tet Offensive roared on, I began to notice a change in the news coverage. It seemed to me that the news reporting was turning against America, subtly portraying us as the bad guys. If I hadn't been to Vietnam, I might not have noticed the subtle change. The My Lai massacre. This 1968 massacre was covered up for months by people in high places. Once the news broke and photos of the atrocity were released, the press focused countless hours of television, radio, and print coverage of the My Lai massacre. The press focused on the 340 to 500 unarmed civilians killed by U.S. Army soldiers, led by Lieutenant William Calley. Although Lieutenant Calley was the only one charged, convicted, and sentenced, many knew he was not the only officer of the massacre, and that the massacre was covered up at very high levels. The truth may never come out. I do not condone what happened at My Lai in 1968. My point in using that as an example is to show how it was used against the men and women of our armed forces. As I said, in 1968, I began to notice the corporate media turning against America. On February 1st, 1968, in a Saigon street, South Vietnam's police chief raised a gun to the head of a handcuffed Viet Cong prisoner and abruptly pulled the trigger. A few feet away, Associated Press photographer Eddie Adams pressed his shutter. Taken during the North's surprise Tet Offensive, Adams' photo showed the war's brutality in a way Americans hadn't seen before. Protesters saw the image as graphic evidence that the United States was fighting on the side of an unjust South Vietnamese government. It won Adams a Pulitzer Prize, and it haunted him. While at home in Hawaii in 1969, and just before I was about to graduate from Kings Point, I met a Marine, a friend of a friend, who had just returned from Vietnam. He was at the Battle of Khe Sanh January 21st to July 1968, in an area of northwestern Quang Tri Province, next to Laos. The main U.S. forces defending Khe Sanh Combat Base KSCB were two regiments of the United States Marine Corps supported by elements from the United States Army and the United States Air Force. The Battle of Khe Sanh was a part of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Tet Offensive. Over a couple beers, he told me he was released from the Marine Corps for what we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Taking a sip of his beer, he said, "The truth is, I was a coward." He went on to explain that after Khe Sanh was overrun by the VC and NVA, rather than stand and fight, he climbed into a shell crater filled with dead U.S. Marines and pulled a body of one of the Marines over him. He lay there as VC and NVA soldiers shot and bayonet dead and dying Marines. His hand holding his beer shook as he spoke. "I can still hear and feel the bayonet of an enemy solider piercing the body of the Marine I was hiding under," he said. Pause and take another sip of his beer, he said, "I can't forgive myself for being a coward. That's why I was released from the Marine Corps. A change of career." In the spring of 1969, I was a month away from graduation. I had a job offer from Standard Oil of California as a third mate, driving oil tankers from California to Hawaii, Tahiti, and Alaska. I was grateful Standard Oil offered me a job because their ship's officers were non-union. Although it was lower pay, I did not want to join the MMNP, the Masters, Mates, and Pilots Union, on principle. I am a capitalist, not a Marxist. Returning to Kings Point, I immediately went to see my economics teacher. We spent long hours discussing the change in media sentiment against America, which also concerned him. He said, "While I was flying B-17s over Germany, I knew the media and the American people were supporting our troops and the war effort." He then showed me a quote from Adolf Hitler, who warned, "Demoralize the enemy from within by surprise, terror, sabotage, assassination. This is the war of the future." I remember saying, "It looks like Hitler is winning in Vietnam." We spent more than an hour together as he told me about being shot down, losing many of his crew, hiding in farmhouses, risking the lives of the French farmers' families who hit him, and finally returned to England, only to be shot down once more and escaping to fly again. As he spoke, sharing his experiences as a pilot in World War II, I was changing. He was not attempting to sway my thinking. He was simply sharing his experiences. As I left his office, my mind was made up. I was changing careers. I was changing from a profession paying $47,000 a year, which was pretty good in 1969, for working only 7 months a year with 5 months off, to earning $2,400 a year with 2 weeks a year off. It was one of the best decisions of my life. In October 1969, I arrived in Pensacola, Florida, and another great adventure began. It was a great adventure because, once again, I had great teachers. Unlike the teachers I'd had in elementary school and high school, these guys were real teachers. They did not teach via textbooks and memorized answers. All the teachers who taught us to fly could actually fly. They were real pilots. They were outstanding teachers who inspired me to want to be like them. Rich Dad's Capitalist Manifesto means that our teachers are real teachers. Professionally, they practice what they teach. Only socialists, fascists, and Marxists use fake teachers who indoctrinate versus teach. It was much like the story of Rich Dad and Poor Dad. My poor dad was a good man, but without real financial education, he did not know he was a Marxist. I wanted to be like my rich dad, a capitalist. As Maria Montessori, educational entrepreneur and founder of the Montessori School, said, "Growth comes from activity, not from intellectual understanding." That is why Rich Dad's Capitalist Manifesto is built around the cash flow board game, created in 1996. Why games are great teachers. One reason I was inspired to become rich is because my rich dad taught his son and me financial education via the game of Monopoly. He would often say, "There are many ways to get rich. One of the best ways is found on the game of Monopoly, and most of us know the formula. 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. Repeat the process." One reason games are better teachers than most school teachers is because games involve all 4 human intelligences. Why school teachers are poor teachers. Looking at the tetrahedron of the 4 intelligences, it is easy to see why most school teachers are poor and poor teachers. Teachers use mental intelligence to memorize. Memorization is not learning. Most smart people have memorized facts, figures, dates, and formulas. When they speak, they often sound intelligent because they can read and recite. The question is, what can they do? This is why Maria Montessori's words are so profound and worth repeating. Growth comes from activity, not from intellectual understanding. She also said, "What the hand does, the mind remembers." 2 versions of the cash flow game. There are 2 versions of the cash flow board game, one traditional and one electronic. When you play the physical cash flow board game, your mind and your hand, must fill out the numbers on the player's financial statement. That is why I recommend the board game over the electronic version of cash flow. The act of physically completing the financial statement is invaluable. There are other reasons why I believe the cash flow game is better than traditional teachers. The cash flow game does not charge for overtime. It will work as hard as you want to work and for as long as you want to work. Even on holidays, summer vacations, and in-service days, the cash flow game doesn't ask for days off or vacation time. Emotional intelligence plays a key role. The biggest reason why teachers are poor and teach others to be poor is because traditional education teaches via the emotion fear. Fear stands for false evidence appearing real. Traditional education teaches and keeps people poor because they teach people the fear of making mistakes and the fear of cooperation. In my poor dad schools, people who made mistakes were labeled stupid, and those who cooperated were considered cheaters. That's not how it works in the real world. In my rich dad's educational system, people who made mistakes and learned from their mistakes got smarter, and people who cooperate are capitalists, innovating and paving the way to the future. Another reason why the cash flow games are great teachers is that the game wants you to make mistakes. With play money, not real money. Cash flow games make you smarter when you make mistakes. There are lessons to be learned in every mistake, and you can apply what you learn to your life and the decisions you make about money. These games, as teachers, do not want medical benefits or retirement plans. Cash flow games will serve you, your family, and friends for generations. As Maria Montessori said, the education of a small child, therefore, does not aim at preparing him for school, but for life. In the real world of capitalism, we get paid for what we can do, not what we talk about. The problem with most school teachers is that they cannot do much. In the real world of business, people are paid for what they can do. One reason why my poor dad was poor after he lost his job as superintendent of education was because he was of little use in the world of corporate America or in small business. He had a PhD, but no marketable skills. He was not an accountant, bookkeeper, attorney, or secretary. He could not sell, and he did not want to be a janitor. One reason why King's Pointers earned so much money right after graduation was because included with their diploma was a license as a ship's mate or ship's engineer and a commission as an ensign in the U.S. Navy or a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps. The cash flow game teaches financial education, financial history, and financial literacy, subjects not taught in school. Most school teachers do not know much about money, taxes, debt, cash flow, accounting, investing, or bookkeeping, much less financial history. Yet these subjects that are all useful and valuable in real life. On top of that, cash flow games do not need teachers. The game empowers the players to be the teachers. As Maria Montessori said, the greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, "The children are now working as if I did not exist." Spiritual intelligence. The first word taught at military schools is mission. Mission is spiritual. Mission is the root word of missionary. When I was in my MBA program, a mission statement was just a mental exercise, not spiritual practice. The mission statement of most corporations is often simply to make more money. That is why many people hate corporate capitalism, yet love entrepreneurial capitalism. The spirit entrepreneurs, such as Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Steve Jobs had when they launched their startups. Would you give your life for a mission? That is where your spiritual intelligence begins. Would you dedicate your life to a cause, a calling bigger than yourself, and possibly give your life a mission? Initially, I went to King's Point for the free education and to gain some self-discipline, which I lacked. Somewhere in the 4-year process, the word mission became a part of me. As the Bible, John 1 verse 14 states, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Don't worry, it's not my intention to preach or try to convert you to Christianity. Just as I despise teachers who are preachers, I despise preachers who do not practice what they preach. I prefer people who keep their mouths shut and live and practice what they preach. I prefer people whose words have become their flesh through their deeds and their actions. Acta non verba. In military school and the Marines, we called people who did not walk their talk whip jaws. The world today is filled with whip jaws. During the Vietnam War, I had 3 classmates shot down. 1 flew for the Navy, 1 for the Marine Corps, and 1 for the Air Force. The Marine Corps pilot and I had been friends since we were 9 years old. We went to the same elementary school in Hilo, Hawaii. Robbie went on to graduate from Dartmouth and flew the A-6 Intruder for the Marines. Jim, the Navy pilot, was a friend from Hawaii who also flew the A-6 Intruder. Neither Robbie nor Jim nor their planes were ever found. They remain MIA, missing in action to this day. My high school classmate who flew the F-4 Phantom for the Air Force was shot down by a SAM, a surface-to-air missile. He spent 2 years in the Hanoi Hilton as a POW before being released. My economics teacher, a U.S. Army B-17 pilot, was shot down twice. I was never shot down, but I did crash 3 times. We were flying night and day, and our aircraft were more fatigued than the crews. The first time my crew and I went down was due to an engine failure, 27 miles out at sea. We swam for 4 hours before we were rescued. The second was a dual hydraulics failure, crashing into the back of a ship at sea. And the third crash was due to a tail rotor failure, surviving by sliding the aircraft across the deck of the aircraft carrier. The good news is that, although we lost 3 aircraft, a crew of 2 pilots, 2 gunners, and 1 crew chief, all returned to the United States healthy and alive. I give credit for our survival to the quality of the Navy and Marine flight schools and the quality of the teachers. Many instructor pilots were men with real combat experience. They were great teachers because they were real teachers. All men and women who serve in the military, in all wars, fight for one thing. We fight for our freedoms, freedoms guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Our freedoms are worth fighting for and dying for. One more important reason why the cash flow game is better than teachers is the mission of the cash flow game. The mission of the cash flow game is to teach capitalism at home, as a counterpoint to teachers who teach communism and communist principles at school. Many Marines have Marine Corps motto tattooed on their body, death before dishonor, and also the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, forever faithful. The motto that Kings Point instills in students is, Acta non verba, deeds not words.